Yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a special press conference during which he responded to President Biden's claim that he's not doing enough on the hostage negotiations. This all comes as the Biden administration itself has been working with Egypt and Qatar on what's being reported as a final take it or leave it deal. So are we at a tipping point? Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Carolyn Glick. She's a senior contributing editor at the Jewish News Syndicate and host of the Carolyn Glick Show on JNS. Carolyn, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always an honor to have you.
Thanks so much for having me on again, Jody. It's great to be with you today.
All right, so let's just start. Fill us in on what the Prime Minister said during his press conference.
Yeah, Prime Minister Netanyahu said a lot of things, but in regard to the issue that you just raised about President Biden's allegation that he isn't doing enough to reach a ceasefire, first of all, he said he couldn't believe that Biden would say that, which was a nice way of saying it's not true, and he said that very clearly. And he said that the administration had put forward a proposal for a ceasefire deal that would bring some of the hostages home in May, and that Israel agreed to it, and that Hamas rejected it. Before that, in April, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, had said that Israel made an extraordinary offer, that it was now Hamas's turn to accept it. And of course, they rejected that. And then last month, the United States put together another final bridging proposal, is what it was called. And Israel accepted it and Hamas rejected it. Hamas isn't even participating in the negotiations. They put forward an offer that 80% of Israelis reject, according to a poll that I just ran through Jewish News Syndicate, where I work as a senior editor, last night. So, I mean, and 2/3 to 3/4 of Israelis support Netanyahu's positions down the line on everything. And so it was a really interesting poll. But, you see that it's a very strange situation that you have when the United States, is supposed to be Israel's ally, is putting an extraordinary amount of pressure on Israel to agree to demands from a terrorist organization that's holding 101 now, after executing 101 hostages, 7 of whom are also American citizens. And the United States is demanding that Israel succumb to their demands, that 80% of Israelis reject, and that I would assume that 80% of Americans would reject if they realized what they were. And even telling Hamas that the United States is blaming Israel for the lack of a ceasefire, which is what President Biden did effectively when he said that Netanyahu wasn't doing enough to reach a ceasefire yesterday. And that's one heck of a message to be sending to the terrorist army that's waging a genocidal war.
Yeah, and I wanted to get your take on that, because, I mean, Hamas is obviously, they've been accusing Israel of dragging months of negotiations. And it sounds like the Biden administration believes this narrative coming from Hamas. But shouldn't he know better than to believe Hamas?
Well, I mean, that's what's so disturbing, is that the United States has been mediating these negotiations, and Hamas has been boycotting most of them. You have two Arab states, Egypt and Qatar, that are acting as mediators, and they're supposed to be pressuring Hamas. Israel is supposed to, apparently, by their game plan, supposed to be pressured by the United States, and Hamas is supposed to be pressured by their state sponsors, Egypt and Qatar. And they're not actually being pressured by the Egyptians or the Qataris. So the only party that's being pressured to make concessions is Israel. And how do we know that Hamas isn't being pressured? Because it hasn't actually changed its negotiating position since October 8th. So, what they want is a complete Israeli capitulation to all of their demands. They want a total withdrawal of Israeli forces from all of Gaza, from the international border, from the perimeter zone that we set up to protect the cities that Hamas conquered and slaughtered the residents of on October 7th, and then, and then brought 256 Israelis to Gaza as hostages. Now 101 still remain there after nearly a year of captivity. And many of them have been executed, as we saw just most recently with the horrible, monstrous murder of those 6 hostages. So it's an amazing situation that we find ourselves in, where They haven't moved. Their position is exactly the same as it was on October 7th. They just want Israel to lose because they want Israel to be destroyed, and they want to do it. And the United
Yeah.
States is pressuring Israel to make more and more concessions to Hamas. And there's no deal. As
Yeah, there's
Prime
no
Minister
deal.
Netanyahu said very clearly. No, Prime Minister Netanyahu said very clearly 2 days ago. He said an organization that executes 6 hostages doesn't want to negotiate. They don't want to
That's
deal.
exactly right. So, what are you hearing, if anything, on this so-called "take it or leave it" final deal that's being discussed? What do you anticipate what in there, or what are you hearing is in there? What are your expectations?
Well, I mean, there have been contradictory reports coming out over the past couple of hours. One of the reports, which I found very alarming, and I think that most Americans would as well, is that the Americans are offering that U.S. military contractors would take over the border zone between Gaza and Egypt, which would place them in enormous danger. And granted, they would be effectively, soldiers of fortune, contractors working for not regular American military. But why would the United States want to subject American Americans to the very distinct possibility of being kidnapped and murdered by Hamas by putting them there on the border? It's a crazy idea. So I think that's one of the things that have been put forward, and others that the Prime Minister's office. I think it was the source of the statement that said that Israel expects for the American offer to be looking much like the other ones were, maybe with increased demands on Israel. But if that's the case, also it won't be something that Israel will agree to, and it's also not something that Hamas will agree to. Because why would Hamas agree to any deal? Final deal, next to final deal, an absolutely final deal, a final deal. When all of the pressure is on Israel. If they're not feeling any pressure, they're not going to make any changes in their
Exactly.
positions.
Exactly right. And it's just a head scratching time. And there's a lot of stress and pressure on this end for the way this administration is handling it, and a lot of prayers going out to Israel. Thank you, Carolyn Glick, senior contributing editor of the Jewish News Syndicate. Always an honor to have you on the program. Thank you for keeping us up to speed.
Thanks for having me on. God bless you, Jody, and
God
your
bless
audience.
you
Thank
as
you very
well.
much.